I want this video to share with you the deep concern on my heart about the shattering of individualism and identity in the move towards demagoguery and extremism in the United States. There's a move underway to shatter people's individuality and their vision and our collective conscience as a people. I want to share with you the tactics and tricks that are used by demagogues to seize power and control and authority over a people group and a nation, and essentially act as puppet masters of the public with massive campaigns of propaganda, extremism, divisiveness, and hatred. These tactics were used by Adolf Hitler, Stalin, Mussolini, and some Chinese communist regimes that murdered millions of people, and they're still in effect today. What is a demagogue? A demagogue is a political leader who seeks support by appealing to the desires and prejudices of ordinary people rather than by using rational argument. A demagogue is a gifted orator and rhetorically exploits the basic fears of people and demonizes groups. A demagogue uses deceptive and manipulative practice of rhetorical speech and media campaigns to exploit an issue for political purposes in a calculated appeal to the desires and prejudices of ordinary people. They seem to be at the base of populist movements. The person and this demagogue is not operating in rational rhetorical speech, but using emotionalism, fear, manipulation as tactics to gain power and control, only in the appearance of appealing to the representation of the ordinary people with whom they seek to manipulate, control, and dominate. This accusation of demagoguery has been made in United States politics against the right wing. Now, if we look at the foundational principles of what demagoguery is, and then examine the tactics and strategies of both the extreme left and the extreme right, we should be able to analyze whether, as I propose, both groups are doing the same thing. A leader who seeks to, rather than unite people, seeks to divide people and seeks to pit people against one another for their personal political agenda, demonizing one group, is a demagogue, and that is demagoguery, which is to be resisted in favor of a leader who rationally represents political opinion and causing us to look for solutions rather than future victims who are in the demonized class. Let's look at the tactics of the Nazi Party. And I have a video, then I'll put a link to the video on this website. And this talks quite a bit about the Nazi regime and how they seized power and how they actually turned an entire nation into a hate group against the Jewish people in World War II. Those who forget the past are doomed to repeat it.
For the country's problems. Hitler was quickly recognized as an extraordinary and charismatic public speaker, and in 1921 became his party's all-powerful chairman. By 1923, the Nazi Party swelled to an estimated 56,000 members. As mentioned, the first years of the Weimar Republic were difficult and tumultuous. Under the leadership of a social democratic government, the Republic faced an economic crisis, which stemmed from the immense expenditures of war, the damage to industrial production capacity, the transition from a war economy to a peace economy, and the high level of reparations that Germany was forced to pay under the Versailles Treaty. This was accompanied by extreme anti-republicanism, which brought about a wave of political assassinations. In November 1923, at a time when the economic crisis in the Republic had reached a peak, with extreme unemployment and unprecedented hyperinflation, Hitler and his fellow party members attempted to seize control of Germany, beginning with the takeover of the Bavarian government in Munich. The armed revolt, known as the Beer Hall Putsch, failed. Caught and tried for treason, Hitler was sentenced to 5 years in jail, though he only served 9 months. During this time, he was imprisoned in very comfortable conditions. He had a private room in which he received his many guests, got regular deliveries of newspapers and books, and was surrounded by his personal assistant and friends. Most of his time in prison was dedicated to the composing of Mein Kampf, My Struggle, his political autobiography in which he outlined his vision for a new future for Germany and the main principles of Nazi ideology or worldview. These continued to be formulated in the following years by Hitler himself and by other central figures in the Nazi Party. What then were the main principles of the Nazi ideology?
Nazi ideology was a worldview that claimed to explain everything about the world and how it functions. At its core, the ideology was racial and biological, totalitarian and imperialistic. Nazi ideology viewed the world as divided into races, with superior and inferior races. And of course, the Aryan race, the so-called Aryan race, was the superior race to which the Nazis attributed all positive developments in humanity, in arts, in science, in technology, and so on. And all the other races of humanity fit into the racial hierarchy in various rungs beneath the so-called Aryan race. For example, the Latin race, the French, the Italians, and so on, were one rung below the Aryan race, who could appreciate culture, but do not create culture and the arts and science and so on. Within this view, the Jews were viewed as a kind of anti-race, an inhuman race of some sort, a creature of some sort that existed in human form. And the Jews were by nature evil and destructive. It was by no accident that the Nazis viewed the Jews in their ideology as a kind of microbe on the one hand, or as the devil incarnate on the other. In other words, some kind of inhuman creature with supernatural powers that could destroy everything that the Aryan race and other people had built in this world. Where did the Nazis get these ideas from? Clearly, they didn't invent anything that they argued. The Nazis drew their ideas from earlier beliefs, and particularly from developments in 19th century research in the sciences and the social sciences, and the development of modern racism, and the development of modern anti-Semitism. What the Nazis did was bring all of this together into one cohesive ideology that was setting out to explain everything. And from that ideology, they argued that the Aryan race has the natural right to rule, and as such, various policies derive from that natural right to rule. For example, the Nazis argued that they had a right to expand eastward into the territories of the lesser, subhuman Slavic peoples, as they argued, because they argued falsely that Germany was the most crowded nation on earth, and therefore, because they were superior and had the right to rule, they could expand into the territory that was unfairly peopled by subhumans. They also, because of their ideology, developed other policies. For example, the policy during the course of World War II, known as T4, or as the euthanasia program, through which they murdered some 200,000 or more mentally handicapped and some physically handicapped Germans, most of them Aryans, but from a Nazi point of view, defective Aryans who didn't contribute to society. Nazi ideology then set out, as other ideologies developed in the same period of the late 19th century and the 20th century, they set out to develop, as they saw it, a perfect world. And they claimed to have that recipe to develop a perfect world. Such utopian ideas tend to develop worlds that are full of destruction. Nazi policymaking then was the introduction, the newness that the Nazis brought to this world. Not the specific ideas that they brought together from the 19th century, but rather making those ideas, coalescing them into one distinct worldview to explain how the world functions and how it ought to function, and then turning that ideology into the engine for policy making, first of all for Germany, and ultimately for all the world. And within that policy making, a special place was set aside for the Jews who constituted the greatest threat to the world because of their destructive nature and because of their immutable nature. They cannot change. And hence Nazi policy making regarding the Jews, which stood at the heart of Nazi ideology, also ultimately was part of what stood at the heart of Nazi policy making and led in the end to the final solution. Nazi totalitarian thinking was on two levels. First of all, that there is no equality among nations or races. Clearly, the Aryan race needs to rule and the German people need to rule. But at the same time, Nazi totalitarianism was internal. How was that nation and how were those people going to be ruled within Germany and within the Aryan race? It was going to be through what developed in Nazi ideology as the Führerprinzip, the principle that the Führer, the leader, Hitler, embodies the will of the nation, the will of the race, and as such, to argue against what he says, to argue against what he determines as policy, is to argue against the race and is therefore unacceptable. And as such, totalitarian rule, and no other kind of rule, was the only way to go.
Nature and biology are very important in this worldview because according to nature and their interpretation of nature, there is a hierarchy in nature. And this stands versus the main idea of this era, as they perceived it, and that is equality. Equality emerged with the Enlightenment, was implemented with the French Revolution, and Nazism stood opposite to that idea. Now, where comes equality from? Equality, which we find in socialism, in communism, in capitalism, in democracy, comes from the Enlightenment. Enlightenment emerged from Christianity. Christianity emerged from Judaism. So we are coming back. Jews are at the origin of the idea of equality. Therefore, everything, Marxism, and capitalism are Jewish, and it is wrong to think that they are opposites, right? They stand versus the natural principle of hierarchy, and Nazism is representing this principle of nature, and therefore society should be ordered also according to the Führerprinzip, and nations should be ordered according to their place on the ladder of nature. And Jews are actually outside this ladder.
Let's look at the Wikipedia. It's just a matter of simple research. Wikipedia, what is a demagogue? Because as I have observed the methodology of politics, and this is why I'm the most apolitical person you could ever want to meet. I participate, I do my due diligence to vote, but I campaign for one leader and one leader only, and that leader's name is Jesus Christ. He's the one who has all authority in heaven and on earth. It's been given to him. He said, therefore, go and make disciples of all nations. He's my leader, and I may participate in a democratic society such as the United States currently is, and I might vote for whichever candidate which I presume to be in the best interests, but at the moment and in the past, on both right and left hands, when we look at the true definition of demagoguery, the true threat of totalitarianism, it comes from a regime of politics which will seek to divide and conquer a people. This, you can look up what is a demagogue on any search engine you choose to do so. This is Wikipedia. It says a demagogue comes from the Greek. It's a popular leader, a populist movement, a leader of a mob, okay, or populist movement. It is a political leader in a democracy who gains popularity by arousing the common people against elites, especially through oratory that whips up the passions of the crowd, a frenzied mob, appealing to the emotions of people by scapegoating the outgroups. In other words, to be demagogue, to engage in demagoguery, you have to create an outgroup. You have to create an us versus them mentality, which is exactly, it's not that I'm opposed to democracy, but I'm saying that the current form of democracy does not meet the criteria of being democratic when you create us versus them and in groups and out groups. And it chooses to appeal to emotion by scapegoating out groups. So it must create a villain, exaggerating dangers to stoke up fears. Now, in all honesty, anyone who's a engages in Trumpianity or Trumpism have to admit that he was a fear stoker. He was, and I'm not opposed to the man. I'm not saying, did he stoke fear? Did he cause us to people to villainize certain people groups? Was he a person who would lead to unity and reconciliation and togetherness and usness and we-ness? Or did he create outgroups? In like manner, the left has done the same thing, created demonizing philosophies and incorporated an ideology that creates an in-group and an out-group, a woke group and a non-woke group. And it exaggerating dangers to stoke fears, lying for emotional effect, or other rhetoric that tends to drown out reason, deliberation, and encourage fanatical popularity. Demagogues overturned established norms of political conduct or promise or threaten to do so. Okay. In other words, stoking emotional fear and doing so to drown out reasoned deliberation means that we start from a place of villainizing. We start from a place of guilty. You whip the mob up into declaring and decreeing all of this, that, or the other people group is this until proven otherwise. It's a creation of a racist state. And it is a man whose lust for power is without recourse to principle, and it leads him to seek to become a master of the masses. He has for centuries practiced his profession of man of the people. He is a product of political tradition nearly as old as westernized civilization itself. And as was stated in the video that preceded, the segment that preceded this, Hitler did not appeal to any new thing. It said in there, he appealed to old ideas. He just couched them in a new way. And this is what critical race theory is seeking to do in the United States now. It's seeking to take the old Marxist ideas of bourgeois, which is the wealthy elite, and the proletariat, which is the working class, and Karl Marx was of the opinion that the working class would rise up and seize power and redistribute wealth, and it is seeking to take that elite being wealthy, bourgeois, and the proletariat being working class, and it's seeking to make it still the economy of critical race theory is power and control, and it's putting that and villainizing it and making it all white power, and it's pitting us versus them mentality, and it's seeking to organize people around oppressed classes and oppressor, and it villainizes and demonizes white people and makes them the villain, and it seeks to appeal to the passions rather than reason, and arouses racial, religious, and class prejudices. So you can see on the left, this current philosophy of critical race theory does not eliminate racism. It seeks to fan the flames of racial division. It is actually akin to a cult and a religious ideology, because it is seeking to create a worldview, and it seeks to create rituals and doctrines. There's books you have to read. There's work you have to do. There's wokeness you have to graduate up into higher and higher levels of wokeness, and it seeks to manipulate class prejudices. A man whose lust for power is without principle. Demagogues have appeared in democracies since ancient Athens. They exploit fundamental weaknesses in democracy because ultimate power is held by the people. It is possible for the people to give that power to someone who appeals to the lowest common denominator of a large segment of the population. Demagogues have usually advocated immediate, forceful action to address a crisis while accusing moderate and thoughtful opponents of weakness or disloyalty. Many demagogues elected to high executive office have unraveled constitutional limits on executive power and tried to convert their democracy into a dictatorship, sometimes successfully. And I will go ahead and add to this right now that although many people, in my opinion, can rightly attribute this to akin to some aspects of Donald Trump, but you can't unattribute it to the current leftist ideology or the left-wing mass ideology of social justice. And in one place, this demagogue is personified in a human being, and in the other instance, this demagoguery or this being of emotional frenzy is not personified in a living being. It's personified in an ideology, the ideology of critical race theory. All people of certain racial descent are guilty until proven innocent. They need to be put in a camp. They need to be put in internment. They need to be indoctrinated. You need to pledge allegiance to the indoctrination of the system, and if you don't do so, you are a white supremacist, you are a racist, you are a homophobe, you are a transphobe, you are everything. And what it does here is it creates a permanent, or to shift the power is much like the regime change of any totalitarian dictatorship. And even some of the special forces in the military go in and they create solidarity among small, disenfranchised, dissident groups and get all of these groups of people to work together cooperatively to overthrow some regime. But the dissident groups are not necessarily any better off or have any different intentions than the government and the regime that's already in power. Okay, so what happens when it's a predatory preying on people who are disenfranchised, people who are economically underprivileged, people who are opportunely underprivileged. And that's what Hitler did. The country was in deep turmoil. People were living in poverty. People were living in despair. And he capitalized. Talk about a system that is against capitalism. He capitalized on their pain to seize this power. And then he exercised and wielded that power against a people group that they demonized. Does this not sound like the same thing? I mean, we talk about people are anti-fascist against the right, okay? But yet, what appears just as fascist, if you merely take the ingredients and the elements and what they do and how they operate and the MO of them, the left is no different. It's creating extreme polarity. It appeals to the basest understanding and desires of human nature. Guess what the the antonym or the opposite of a demagogue is a reconciler, a uniter, a peacemaker,